Brr. Vampire King laughed when she threatened to sever their bond. She severed it without another word. The night in Valerian was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint rustle of silk along the marble floors of the royal palace. Torches cast long shadows along the walls, flickering against the carved figures of ancient kings whose eyes seemed to follow every step taken in their halls. Queen Lysandra walked steadily, her cloak trailing behind her like a shadow of her own will, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Brr. She was not like other women who had come before King Draven. Those who had entered the Vampire King's court either bowed and melted into the world of shadows, or they fell under his control, their wills bending to his dominance. But Lysandra. She carried herself with a quiet defiance that even centuries of darkness could not break. The bond. It was invisible to others, but it hummed through the air like a quiet storm. A bond forged not by choice, but by necessity. A magical link between a mortal sorceress and an immortal king. It tied their fates together, sharing power, life, and even thoughts at times. To most, it seemed unbreakable. To Draven, it was perfect. To Lysandra, it was a chain she could no longer bear. She paused at the top of the grand staircase, the throne room stretching before her like a cathedral of shadows. The chandeliers above swayed slightly, disturbed by the chill that seeped from the windows, though the night was still. And there he was, King Draven, the Vampire King of Valerian, standing in the center of the room with his cloak brushing the marble, tall, perfect, and terrifying. He noticed her instantly, as if he had been waiting. His eyes, dark as the void, glimmered with amusement. "You walk as if the world is yours to command," he said, his voice smooth like polished stone. "Yet the world has always been mine." Lysandra met his gaze, unflinching. "Perhaps the world belongs to no one," she replied softly, her words carrying more strength than any sword. "Even you, Draven?" He smiled then, a slow, dangerous curl of lips, bold as always. "You forget, little queen, that defiance in this court comes with consequences."
"I remember perfectly," she said, her voice low but steady.
"And I have accepted them. But there is one thing I will no longer endure. This bond." Draven's smile widened, almost a sneer. He leaned back against the throne's carved arm, eyes glinting with dark humor. "You threaten to sever the bond?"
And what do you think will happen, Lysandra? You cannot undo what magic has woven."
"You think you can escape me?" Her heart did not falter. She had spent countless nights studying the rituals, learning the intricacies of their magical link. It was dangerous, forbidden even. And yet, every moment under Draven's gaze, every forced command, had only strengthened her resolve.
"I can!" she said simply, lifting her hand and letting it tremble not with fear but with quiet determination.
"Brave. I will sever it, and I will do it without begging for mercy, without pleading, without looking back." For a moment, Draven laughed, a deep, echoing sound that filled the throne room, bouncing off the walls, shaking the air. "You amuse me," he said, the laugh fading into a soft murmur. "Do you truly believe your mortal will can undo what binds us? Do you not feel the power in your veins, the pull of the magic that links us?" Lysandra did feel it, the pull, like invisible chains tugging at her very soul, but she also felt something stronger, the fire of choice. She had spent too long being a pawn in a game where the stakes were her life, her freedom, her very heart. "I feel it," she said, stepping forward. "And I choose to break it." Draven's eyes darkened, a flicker of something she had never seen, maybe shock, Maybe respect, or maybe fear. Brr.
He straightened, taking a step toward her. And if you do, Lysandra.
Do you think the consequences will spare you? Magic like this? It does not forgive. Not even me. Brr. She did not hesitate. She reached into the small pouch at her side, pulling out a talisman etched with symbols older than the oldest vampire in Valerian. The air around them shifted immediately. The torches flickered, shadows deepened, and the temperature seemed to drop.
Even Draven's smile faltered.
You would dare? He whispered, his voice now a mix of awe and warning. I would, she said. She traced the symbols with careful hands, reciting words that had been forbidden to mortal lips. The magic pulsed like a heartbeat, like lightning trapped in the air. She felt a pull inside herself, a connection stretching and twisting, resisting. Draven raised his hand as if to stop her, but hesitated. In that moment he realized he could not stop her, that for the first time his power was not enough. And then... The talisman glowed. The air cracked with energy. Lysandra's lips parted, her voice steady, commanding, freeing. The bond snapped. It was silent at first. Then the magic recoiled like a living thing, leaving the throne room in a stunned hush. Draven's eyes widened, the laughter gone, replaced with disbelief. His hand dropped to his side. The pull he had always felt toward her, the silent understanding, the shared power, all vanished in an instant. Lysandra took a deep breath, her body trembling not from fear but from release. It is done, she said. Her voice was calm, final. Draven stared at her, no words forming. The shock was more than physical. Centuries of certainty, centuries of control, shattered in one quiet act of defiance. Without another word? He finally asked, his voice low, incredulous. She nodded. She turned her back to him, not out of fear, but out of resolve. She walked away, every step echoing on the marble floor like a drumbeat of freedom.
The court was silent.
Courtiers and nobles watched in awe, some with fear, some with admiration. Whispers spread like wildfire. She did it! She severed the bond! Draven remained where he stood, his eyes following her, filled with something raw, unspoken, and new. For the first time he felt the cold bite of vulnerability. The throne was his, yes, but the queen he had thought tied to him, gone, by choice. And yet, as Lysandra reached the doorway, stepping into the cool night air, she did not feel entirely free. The world outside was uncertain. Danger lurked beyond the palace walls, enemies who had waited for this moment, enemies who would see the kingdom weakened, and perhaps her as prey. She did not turn back. Not yet! Not until she understood that the act of severing the bond was only the beginning. Freedom, she knew, came with a price. Back inside, Draven sank into the throne, his cloak pooling around him like shadows drawn to darkness. His thoughts were a storm of rage, disbelief, and something he could not name. The woman who had dared to defy him, who had shattered the magic that bound them, walked into the night, and somewhere deep inside he knew he could not let her go entirely. The palace felt emptier without the pull of their shared magic. The torches flickered and cast longer shadows. For the first time, Draven considered the possibility of loss, the terrifying weight of uncertainty. Outside, Lysandra paused on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. The moonlight touched her hair, silver and soft, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel the enormity of what she had done. She had severed the bond, yes, but the pull of destiny, of fate, of powers older than herself still lingered. She wrapped her cloak tighter around her shoulders and whispered to the night, to herself, to the winds of Valarian. I have chosen my path. I will not be bound again. Not by magic, not by fear, not by him. And in the dark throne room, Draven rose slowly, eyes glinting like the edge of a blade. A storm was coming, he realized. A storm that would test kingdoms, hearts, and the limits of power itself. He stepped toward the window, looking out across the silver-lit land. If she walks away, he murmured, voice low and dangerous, then she walks into a world she cannot survive alone. And I will see whether she has the strength to face it. The night held its breath. The bond was broken, but the story was far from over. And somewhere in the shadows both king and queen understood. What had been severed could be healed, but only at a cost none of them had yet imagined. The halls of Valarian felt emptier than ever. The torches flickered in the shadows, as though sensing the absence of the bond that had once hummed between the king and the queen. Whispers floated through the palace like restless ghosts. Courtiers and nobles dared not speak too loudly, for fear of provoking Draven, but every eye was fixed on him, the king who had been shaken by a single mortal's defiance. Draven stood at the window of the throne room, his cloak brushing the marble floor, the cold night air drifting in. The bond was gone, and with it, the certainty he had always relied upon. His empire was vast, his power unmatched, yet for the first time he felt vulnerable. He had laughed when Lysandra threatened to sever their bond.
He had thought it impossible, a mortal challenging a vampire king. But she had done it.
The thought alone sparked a storm of pride and fury inside him. I cannot lose her, he muttered to himself, the words escaping almost as a whisper, but even as he spoke them, he knew the truth. He had already lost her, at least for now. Meanwhile, Lysandra had made her way through the quiet streets of Valarian, her cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. Freedom, she thought, tasted like moonlight and cold stone. Every step away from the palace felt like a release, yet also carried a weight she had not expected. The world outside the palace was dangerous. Shadows moved in the corners of her vision, and the wind carried whispers she could not understand. Her magic, once entwined with Draven's through the bond, now surged through her alone. It was intoxicating and frightening all at once. She could feel the pull of her own power, unbound, unrestricted, yet every spell required her complete concentration. The bond had been a source of strength, and now, without it, she was alone in a world that sought to crush her. She stopped near the edge of the city, overlooking the valley below. The lights of Valarian shimmered in the distance, like a field of stars fallen to earth. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine life beyond the palace, beyond Draven, beyond the chains of expectation. A life she could choose herself. But the moment was brief. Danger always followed her. Back in the palace, Draven moved through the corridors like a shadow given form. He had summoned his advisors, the council of elders who had governed alongside him for centuries. They looked at him with cautious eyes, sensing both his strength and the tremor beneath it. "She has done the impossible," one of the elders said quietly. She severed the bond. Draven's gaze did not leave the moonlit horizon outside. "And now she walks free," he said. "And free is dangerous." Another elder, older than the rest and wise in the ways of both magic and politics, spoke next. The court will rise against us. Rivals who have waited for weakness will see it now. And the woman who did this, she may invite danger not just to herself, but to the entire kingdom. Draven's jaw tightened. He had always ruled through fear and power, but bond had been more than control. It had been certainty. Without it, everything was fragile. And Lysandra, once bound and contained, had become a force beyond his reach. He turned away from the window and walked through the throne room, the echoes of his boots striking the marble like the sound of a drumbeat marking the start of war. His mind raced with strategies, contingencies, and possibilities. He could not allow Lysandra to be destroyed, nor could he allow her to be lost. And yet, he could not reach her. Not directly. The next morning, Lysandra traveled to the outskirts of Ilarion, seeking a place where she could hide and learn more about the threats that might follow her. She found an abandoned watchtower on a cliff overlooking the dark forest beyond the city. Its walls were crumbled, but its height offered a perfect vantage point. She lit a small fire and began studying her magic, weaving protective wards around herself. Even in solitude, she could feel the lingering threads of the bond, like faint echoes in her mind. They were memories of Draven, moments of shared power, shared emotion, shared presence. She closed her eyes and drew a steadying breath, reminding herself why she had chosen this path. Freedom required courage, and courage required sacrifice. But the forest beyond the cliff was not empty. Shadows moved among the trees, silent and watchful. Sensed the weakening of the vampire king's power. They were drawn to Lysandra, curious, hungry, and dangerous. Meanwhile, Draven had begun his own journey. He could not approach her openly. Not yet. His advisors warned him that the court was unstable, that enemies might strike if he left the city. And yet, he could not remain idle. Every moment Lysandra walked alone. Every step she took into danger pulled at something deeper within him, something he had never admitted even to himself. He feared losing her entirely. He began moving in the shadows, sending silent scouts and magical messengers to track her path. He could not touch her, not while respecting the choice she had made, but he could watch, learn, and wait for the moment when their paths might cross again. Days passed. Lysandra trained in secret, strengthening her magic and her resolve. She created wards that could repel minor curses, wards that could shield her from spies and assassins. Yet, despite her careful preparation, she felt the weight of loneliness pressing against her chest. The nights were long, and the silence often spoke louder than words. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in blood red and violet, Lysandra sensed a presence nearby. First, not human, not animal, but something ancient and unseen. Her heart raced, her fingers brushing the edge of the talisman that had severed the bond. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. A shadow moved in the trees. Then, another. The air felt heavy with power, and she realized she was surrounded by forces she had not anticipated, curses older than the city itself, waiting for an opportunity to strike. From the shadows a voice called out, smooth and taunting. "The queen thinks herself free, but freedom comes at a price." "Show yourself," she demanded. A figure stepped from the shadows, cloaked and tall, with eyes that gleamed like coals. "Do not be foolish," the figure said. "You walk where mortals fear to tread." "The bond you broke. It is more than a link between two souls." It was a seal against powers you cannot yet comprehend. Her heart tightened. "Then why speak to me? Why not strike? The figure's lips curved into a faint smile. Burst. Because I am curious. And curiosity, like you, is dangerous. Back in Valarian, Draven sensed the shift. His mind, attuned to Lysandra even without the bond, detected danger. He moved with a speed that belied his exhaustion and centuries of politics, descending into the forest with shadows as his allies. He arrived just in time to see the cloaked figure vanish into the trees, leaving Lysandra standing alone, trembling but resolute. The danger was real, immediate, and deadly. Desperation. And though she had grown strong on her own, she was not yet ready for what the forest had in store. Draven stepped from the shadows, his presence immediate and commanding. Desperation. Lysandra turned, startled, then composed herself. You should not be here, she said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded. I should not, he admitted, stepping closer. But I cannot let you face this alone. You cannot protect me anymore, she replied, her eyes flashing with both defiance and fear. You severed the bond, Draven. You laughed when I threatened you. And yet here you are. He did not answer her. He simply stood there, a dark figure against the twilight, and for a moment, silence stretched between them. A bridge of tension, longing, and unspoken words. Then, from deeper in the forest, a sound echoed. A cry, low and threatening. Stay! Magic surged through the air, wild and uncontrolled. Lysandra instinctively raised her hands, summoning a protective barrier, but the force of it was immense, shaking the earth beneath their feet. Draven's eyes narrowed. This is what comes from breaking the bond, he said, his voice low, sharp. The world will test you, Lysandra, and it will not wait for you to be ready. She clenched her fists, feeling both fear and determination surge within her. Then I will be ready, she said. I will survive. But even as she spoke, a shadow lunged from the trees, a figure cloaked in darkness with power enough to rival both of them. Lysandra felt her barrier falter, her magic straining. Draven stepped forward, placing himself between her and the force, and for the first time, they moved not as enemies, but as allies. The clash of power lit the forest like lightning, and the ground trembled beneath them. Lysandra's heart raced, not just from fear, but from the strange and dangerous familiarity of being near him. The bond may have been broken, but some connection lingered, something deeper than magic, deeper than choice. As the shadows withdrew, leaving the clearing in ruin, Lysandra and Draven stood facing each other, breaths heavy, eyes locked. Neither spoke. Words felt useless. Finally, Lysandra stepped back, her cloak swirling around her. This is only the beginning, she said, her voice soft but resolute. Draven's gaze did not leave hers. And I will not let you face it alone, he said. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying whispers of power and danger. In the distance, more shadows moved, watching, waiting, calculating. And somewhere deep inside, both of them understood the truth. Freedom had come at a price, and the storm had only just begun. The forest beyond Valarian had always been a place of whispers and shadows, but now it felt alive with a dangerous curiosity. Lysandra moved carefully, her cloak brushing against the undergrowth, her eyes alert for the slightest movement. The protective warts she had spent days crafting shimmered faintly around her, a fragile shield against unseen threats. Yet she knew deep inside that alone her magic could only do so much. The air was thick with tension. Every rustle of leaves, Every snap of a twig sounded amplified, as if the forest itself was watching, waiting. The memory of the shadows she had faced near the cliff haunted her, the ones she had barely held at bay, and the figure who had watched from the darkness with glowing eyes. She did not know if it was the same presence, but she could feel it closing in. Brr. Footsteps came from behind, soft and deliberate. Lysandra froze, hand gripping her talisman. Brett. Her instincts screamed danger. "You shouldn't have come here," she said sharply, not turning around. Brr. The voice was calm, even measured, but it carried a weight she recognized instantly. Inspiration.
I warned you, she said, finally spinning to face him, her eyes flashing with defiance. I am no longer bound to you, Draven.
You cannot protect me. You cannot command me. Brah. He regarded her quietly, his dark eyes unreadable. I am not here to command you, he said. Burb. I am here because the forest does not understand that you are free. The danger you face, Brr. It will not wait for agreements or declarations of independence.
Lysandra's heart raced.
Brr. She had not expected him to follow her so quickly. She had anticipated evasion, secrecy, distance, but not this, Britt. Not him standing there, silent, a shadow among shadows, his presence both threatening and reassuring.
I can handle myself, she said, her voice sharper than she intended.
I have faced more in the past week than you will in a century of your throne. Draven's gaze softened just slightly, but enough for her to feel the faint pull of old familiarity. Not the bond, but something deeper, lingering. You are strong, he said quietly. Aberration. Too strong, perhaps. But strength alone will not save you. Brr. I have seen what lurks in these woods. You will need me. Burring. Her instincts rebelled. She did not want his help. Beret. She wanted freedom, control, a life she could choose without shadows or demands. Yet the forest seemed to thrum with malevolent energy, testing her defenses. Aberration. The hairs on the back of her neck rose. Aberration. Sensed movement, something unnatural, something ancient. Then why are you here? She asked, her voice almost a whisper, even as her hands trembled. Brr.
He stepped closer. Careful! Deliberate! Respecting the distance! She demanded.
Because you're not meant to face this alone, he said. Aberration.
And because I cannot let you be harmed, even by choice. The words struck her harder than any spell. They were not commands.
Brave. They were not dominance. They were acknowledgement of her autonomy, and yet they carried the weight of centuries. Before she could respond, the shadows moved again. Figures, cloaked and silent, emerged from the darkness. Not human, not fully, but creatures of ancient magic and malice. Their eyes glimmered like shards of night, and their presence warped the air around them. Lysandra raised her hands instinctively, chanting protective words, her voice echoing through the trees. Aberration. Energy flared around her, golden and fragile, pushing back the approaching figures. But there were too many, and their power was growing. Aberration. Draven moved beside her, placing a hand on the ground. Shadows recoiled, whispering in languages older than Velaryon. His presence alone carried authority, not through fear, but through power. Together their magic intertwined briefly, not as a bond, but as an alliance. Breath. The creatures hissed and surged forward. Lysandra's barrier flickered, strained under their assault. Brave. Draven's dark energy met hers, stabilizing the wards just enough to hold them at bay. "You are reckless," he said, his voice sharp, eyes scanning for weaknesses. "But you are clever. Do not let pride cost you your life." "I can survive," she said, grit in her voice. Brr.
I will survive.
He studied her, and for a moment he saw more than defiance. He saw determination, resilience, and a spark of something he had not expected. Growth.
Inspiration. She was no longer the woman bound to him by magic. She was becoming her own force. The shadow creatures lunged again, stronger, faster, feeding on the fear and uncertainty around them. Lysandra faltered. Her barrier wavered. Draven acted instinctively. With a sweep of his hand, he drew energy from the ground and the trees, pushing a wave of dark power forward. The creatures shrieked and recoiled, some disintegrating into mist, others retreating into the deeper shadows. Brr. Lysandra exhaled sharply, heart racing.
"Why do you help me?" she asked, not accusingly, but with a mix of curiosity and caution.
Bert. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he extended his hand, dark and steady. Breath. "Because even without the bond, you matter. And because what hunts you will not stop with you alone. Brr. I will see this through." Something inside her wavered. Brr. She wanted to refuse, to push him away, to insist on her independence. Yet the night, the forest, the creatures, inspiration, all reminded her that freedom came with risk. And sometimes, survival required unexpected alliances. Inspiration. The forest fell quiet for a moment, almost as if it were holding its breath. The shadows had receded, but the tension lingered, thick and oppressive. Brr. Lysandra lowered her hands, energy still crackling faintly around her. "Very well," she said finally, her voice steady. Brr. "We walk together, but on my terms. Do you understand?" Doctor nodded, eyes softening just enough to reveal the depth of his acknowledgement. "Your terms," he agreed, "and I will honor them." They moved deeper into the forest, silent except for the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet. Neither spoke much, but the shared vigilance created a bond more fragile and complex than magic. A mutual understanding forged in danger, trust, and unspoken respect. Hours passed. Brrr. The moon rose high, casting silver light across twisted branches and gnarled roots. Lysandra felt her magic pulsing in harmony with the rhythm of the forest, stabilizing and protecting her. Draven stayed close, a quiet sentinel, his senses alert to every disturbance. And yet, danger was not done with them. Inspiration. From the darkness, a whispering voice called out, melodic and chilling. "The bond is broken." But the thread remains. You cannot escape what is written. Inspiration. Lysandra froze. The voice carried power, weight, and ancient intent. Inspiration. Her fingers tightened around her talisman, sensing that this was no ordinary threat. Draven's eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows. "It is coming," he said, his voice low and serious. "And we must be ready." The forest responded to the presence. Leaves shivered, shadows deepened, and the air grew heavy with anticipation. Bray. Lysandra felt a strange pull, a memory of the bond she had severed, mingling with the raw energy of her own magic. "This is different," she whispered. Brr.
"This is not just a creature. It is bolder, stronger."
Inspiration. And it knows me. Draven's gaze softened, but his body remained tense. But, Then we face it together, he said. Not as king and queen, not as master and bound, but as two who have survived much already. Bear. Together. She looked at him, measuring the sincerity in his eyes, the promise in his words. Inspiration. And though the memory of their bond was gone, a new connection formed. Fragile, untested, yet undeniable. The shadows shifted again, coalescing into a figure that rose above the trees. Cloaked in darkness, with eyes like molten gold, it radiated power that made the ground beneath them tremble. Lysandra and Draven stepped forward simultaneously, instinctively protective, their magic weaving together in a delicate dance.
They did not speak. Words were unnecessary.
Their combined presence was a warning, a challenge, and a promise. The figure tilted its head, observing them, then extended a hand. Dark energy swirling around it. Break.
You have broken what was given to you, it said, voice echoing like thunder in the trees. But breaking is only the beginning.
Operation.
Rebellion has consequences, little queen. And the king
Will soon learn that shadows do not forgive. A gust of wind swept through the clearing and the figure vanished into the night, leaving silence in its wake. Operation. Lysandra's heart pounded. She had survived the first wave of danger, but she knew instinctively that this was only the beginning. The ancient forces of the forest, the curses tied to the severed bond, and her own unresolved feelings for Draven, all waited for the next moment, ready to strike. Draven placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her, steadying her. This is far from over, he said quietly. And whatever comes next, we face it together. Lysandra nodded, a strange mix of fear, determination, and something else stirring in her chest. Respect. Trust. Trust. A fragile spark of something deeper. The forest whispered around them, alive with anticipation. And as they prepared for the trials ahead, both understood the alliance was uneasy, the danger immense, and the journey toward survival, understanding, and perhaps redemption only just beginning. The first light of dawn filtered through the dense trees of the forest, touching the leaves with silver and gold. Lysandra stood at the edge of a clearing, her breath coming in shallow bursts, her hands still trembling slightly from the encounter the night before. The ancient entity that had appeared, cloaked in darkness, radiating power beyond comprehension, had vanished for now, leaving only whispers in its wake. But the danger it represented lingered, heavy and insistent. Draven appeared behind her, silent as a shadow, his presence steady and grounding. His eyes, dark and intense, scanned the forest. For centuries he had faced enemies, rebellions, curses, and kings. Yet something about this threat unsettled him in a way that felt new and sharp.
You are sure you can continue? He asked, his voice low, careful, almost gentle.
Lysandra turned to him, a faint smile touching her lips, though her eyes held the storm of exhaustion and determination.
I have no choice,
she said. If I do not face it, who will? If I falter, everything we fought for, the freedom, the kingdom, the future, is lost. There was respect in his gaze, deep and quiet, and yet a tension lingered between them, the kind born of shared danger and unspoken history. The bond was gone, yes, but the connection between them, forged in fire and shadow, remained. The forest grew still. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Lysandra could feel the entity's presence returning, pulling at the edges of her consciousness like a tide. She placed her hands on the talisman that had severed their bond months ago. She had not needed it for power, but as a reminder of choice, of autonomy, and of survival. Draven stepped beside her, the soft brush of his cloak against hers almost comforting. We face this together, he said. Not because of a bond, but because of choice.
Operation. You choose me as I choose you.
The air shifted, heavy with anticipation. Shadows deepened in the clearing as the entity emerged again.
Berzound. This time it took a more defined shape, tall and cloaked in dark mist, with eyes that burned like molten gold. Its voice echoed through the clearing, both beautiful and terrifying. Brr. You dare defy what was given to you, it said, words vibrating through the air. You severed the bond. You tested the king. Now you must pay.
Your freedom has consequences beyond your understanding.
Lyssandra's hands rose instinctively. Brr. Energy swirled around her, shimmering wards of gold and silver light. She felt Draven's presence beside her, not commanding, not controlling, but lending strength, sharing his awareness and instincts. Together, they were formidable. Yet the entity's power was unlike anything they had encountered. You will not intimidate me, Lysandra said, her voice steady even as her pulse raced. I will survive. I will protect this kingdom, and I will protect myself. The entity laughed, a sound like clashing steel and shifting stone. Then prove it, little queen. And king. It turned its gaze toward Draven, who stood motionless. You will learn that power alone is not enough.
Without warning, the entity unleashed a wave of energy. The ground trembled, trees bending under the force, leaves swirling into a vortex of shadows.
Lyssandra's wards flared, bright and powerful. But even her magic strained under the assault. She faltered, and for a fleeting moment, fear clutched her heart.
Draven acted instantly. He drew energy from the earth itself, channeling it through his hands, his presence a shield and sword all at once. Shadows collided with shadows, light with darkness, and the clearing became a battlefield of forces far older than either of them.
Lysandra found her rhythm.
She channeled her magic not alone, but in tandem with Draven, their energies dancing together in harmony rather than dominance. She realized then that the bond they had severed had not been the source of their strength. It had been their trust, respect, and shared courage that made them formidable. Together, she whispered. Draven nodded, a faint smile breaking through the tension. Together, he echoed. The entity shrieked, lashing out with waves of pure, corrosive energy. Lysandra felt herself nearly overwhelmed, but Draven's calm steadiness grounded her. She remembered the lessons of the past months, how she had survived without him, how she had learned her own power. She would not falter now. She raised her hands high, summoning a surge of energy from deep within herself. It was raw, unrefined, but pure in intent. Draven mirrored her, letting their combined strength ripple outward, meeting the entity's assault head-on. The clash was violent, a storm of light and shadow that tore through the clearing. For a moment everything seemed to hang in suspension, time, space, even their hearts beating in tandem. And then, with a surge of will and determination, Lysandra and Draven unleashed a final wave of energy, pure, focused, and unyielding. The entity recoiled, its form breaking into mist, dissipating into the night, leaving silence in its wake. The clearing was still. The leaves fell softly, the wind whispering through the trees. Brr. Lysandra collapsed to her knees, exhausted but alive. Draven knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. Brr. You survived, he said softly. I survived, she repeated, voice trembling but firm. 'Cause I had to, 'cause I chose to. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what had passed settling around them. The forest seemed to exhale, releasing the tension that had gripped it for centuries. Lysandra felt a warmth spread through her chest. Not fear, not defiance, but something new, something deeper. Draven looked at her, his eyes reflecting both relief and a long-suppressed vulnerability. "You are incredible," he said. "Not bound to me, not under my control, yet stronger than I have ever seen. I underestimated you." She shook her head, a faint smile on her lips. "We underestimated each other," she said softly. I thought freedom was about walking alone, but sometimes separation. Strength comes from trust, not chains. For the first time, Draven truly understood Bird. Not the bond they had severed, but the connection they had built through trials, respect, and shared danger. He reached out slowly and took her hand. Not commanding, not forcing, simply offering a touch that spoke of equality, trust, and choice. Lysandra looked at him, seeing him fully for the first time. Not as a king, not as a master, not as the vampire who had ruled her life, but as a man shaped by centuries of power and isolation, capable of change and of care. She squeezed his hand lightly, acknowledging that the connection they shared was no longer forced, no longer magical, but earned. "We face the world together," Draven said, his voice low, deliberate.
Together, Lysandra agreed. The sun rose fully now, spilling golden light over the clearing.
The shadows of the forest receded, leaving a sense of calm and renewal. The kingdom of Valerian, the dangers that had haunted them, and the magic that had bound them all. These things were far from resolved, yet in that moment they understood something vital. The future could be theirs to shape. They rose together, walking out of the forest side by side. Lysandra's heart no longer trembled with fear, and Draven's steps carried neither arrogance nor control. Instead, their strides matched in rhythm, strength, and purpose. Along the path, ruins of ancient magic and traces of past curses lay scattered, reminders of the challenges still ahead. But the forest seemed less menacing now, as if acknowledging that two forces, once bound by magic and now bound by choice, could face even the oldest powers and survive.
They reached the edge of Valerian as the city woke beneath the morning sun.
People moved through the streets, unaware of the battles fought in shadows and in the hearts of kings and queens. Lysandra and Draven paused, looking out over the city. It was theirs to protect, theirs to shape, yet it was no longer about control or fear.
"You changed," Lysandra said softly.
Since the bond, since everything. Draven smiled faintly, a shadow of centuries past, and a promise of something new.
"No," he said.
You changed me.
By breaking the bond, by surviving, by trusting, by teaching me that even a king can learn humility.
She laughed lightly, a sound like wind through the trees. "Then perhaps we have both learned what true strength is." He nodded, eyes meeting hers. "Yes, Brett. Strength is not domination. It is trust. It is respect. It is knowing that some bonds are worth more when they are chosen, not forced." For a long moment they stood together, hands clasped, hearts steady, minds clear. The kingdom below, the dangers beyond, and the shadows of the past all existed, but they no longer ruled them. and as they walked forward side by side, they understood that the story of a king and a queen, of freedom and power, of danger and redemption, was not ending. It was evolving, stronger, wiser, and forged by choice rather than magic. Breath. The world of Valarian waited, filled with mysteries, threats, and opportunities. And Lysandra and Draven, once bound and torn apart, now walked together as equals, a partnership of strength, respect, and deep, unspoken understanding. Freedom had been won. Trust had been earned. And the future was theirs to face together.